In today's episode, we are joined again by researcher, educator, and seasoned flight paramedic Russell Griffin for a thought-provoking conversation about the powerful connection between identity, culture, and safety in the air medical world.
Organizational identity really is that shared understanding of who the organization is, right? So I can ask you the question, right? So who are we at work? What's your organizational identity? You would answer that question from your oneness, how connected you are to your organization, right? So when you have a strong organizational identity in the social sciences world, we would say that you identify with that organization. But for that to be true, you actually have to know what the answer to that question is. What is your organizational identity?
Welcome back to the Valor Flight Crew podcast, hosted by Echo and brought to you by Vertical Helicasts and Valor Plus. Together, we explore what really shapes safety culture inside high-risk organizations, from the policies written on paper to the behaviors crews live out every day. We dive into how personal identity, professional background, and organizational expectations influence decision-making, communication, and crew dynamics in both aviation and healthcare environments. This episode takes an honest look at the challenges of blending aviation and medical cultures, the critical role of crew resource management, and why humility, vulnerability, and open dialogue are essential for building strong teams and safer operations. It's a conversation about leadership, accountability, and understanding how the culture we create directly impacts the care we provide and the risks we accept. So strap in, check your gauges, and join us as we lift into another conversation focused on safety, culture, and the people behind the mission. Thank you to our sponsors, Precision Aviation Group, Airbus, and Metro Aviation.
Welcome to the Valor Flight Crew podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicast, produced in partnership with Echo, Every Coast Helicopter Operations. The Valor Flight Crew podcast promotes the personnel and life-saving equipment behind helicopter air ambulance services. Join hosts Mike Fideli and Blake Schreider for in-depth interviews and expert insights from air medical personnel, pilots, communication specialists, and maintenance crews who play critical roles in airborne emergency response.
Line 1 accepting.
Copy, line 1, gotcha, accepting. You're going to be talking to Red Feather 1 on LCEMS.
I think what the challenge is sometimes, and where the CRM may make or break that aspect of it, is when you're faced with those difficult situations. I can think of certainly a couple of times in my career where the situation has come up of it's an IFR night. We're going to have to land at an airport. The patient is got X, Y, or Z going on with them. So it's going to require intermediate transport, which maybe that's anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes to get to or from the hospital, plus the transfers, right? And so that can play out one of two ways. That can play out where you have a pilot that automatically accepts the flight because, hey, we can fly, we can go do this.
Yeah.
And your med crew's sitting back saying, yeah, but what about, is this the right thing for the patient? Right?
Oof.
Or then you have that situation where the three of you make that determination together to figure out what the best option is for that particular patient. And maybe ground critical care is the better option based off of location and weather concerns or multiple moves for that patient or what have you. And so I think we've all kind of been faced with some similar situations like that along the way, where it was like, we have that identity. We know what we are here to do and want to do, but we have differing opinions on how we're going to accomplish that task, right? And that's where the CRM has maybe made or broken those situations to be able to affect the overall culture of that crew, right? And maybe I'm not saying that the right way as far as using all of those terms, but I feel like those are how a lot of those things maybe come together.
Yeah, I think what you're doing is you're bridging actually two really important big concepts. And that is, many of us, I think, when we think about CRM, it's easy to apply it to the aviation element components of a trip, right? But I don't know about your experience. In my experience, what you just described was an even more complicated scenario, especially when you're getting clinical or transport related elements that you now actually become uncomfortable. But you might be comfortable with the like the actual, I know we're IFR certified, the pilot's great, but the patient's clinical information that I have, the components that we're going to have to go through to be able to execute this mission, or maybe even the patient's acuity, right? Their actual, condition. I might be uncomfortable. I don't know about y'all's experience, but I never really felt I was in a super great position to say I'm uncomfortable with that clinically. Like I can do ECMO, I could do balloon pumps, right? I could do some ECMO. I mean, like that stuff was okay. But when you start mixing all those other things in, you raise the question of like, is this what's in the best patient's interest from a clinical perspective? I don't know about y'all's take on this, but from a medicine side of the house, it can be really easy to like, just shut up and go. Yeah. Like you figure it out at the bedside, and I'm not saying like anybody ever literally told me that. That is exactly what I experienced. I mean, like you can have that conversation when you get to the patient's side. And it's like, okay, whatever.
But even if, like the term, the phrase that I have heard and have been told to accept is, well, sometimes the work is hard. And okay, yes, sometimes the work is hard. And I don't think any of us will dispute that, yeah, sometimes the work is hard. But where I think this decision making or this CRM, like you said, it's easy to apply it to the aviation side, and we love to blanket the phrase, and we love our words and acronyms of CRM. But when it comes to the actual clinical side, like I wonder sometimes where, well, sometimes Blake, the work is hard. Yeah, no shit. Like that's why I'm here. But is it what's best for the patient? And I think sometimes we get that thrown in our lap and saying, well, that's why you're here. And that's why you do this job. Okay. But at the same time, what I'm telling you, Mike, you brought up this great perspective of, it's an IFR night. There's going to be multiple moves of the patient. Well, guess what, Blake? You got to suck it up. Sometimes the work is hard. Yes, I know the work is hard. Duh. That's why I'm here. But if we look at it from the perspective of what's really best for the patient, now is my organizational culture and identity to be like, we can take that patient because we can do all these things. We did all these things, and look how great we are because we did these things. We're amazing. We transferred this ECMO patient. We transferred this patient that had 2 Impellas and they're intubated, and we did all these things. Yeah, but it took us 12 hours to do it. And we moved the patient multiple times. They coded or whatever. You know what I'm saying? So like, I don't know, how many times do I need the phrase, sometimes the work is hard, thrown in my face? And do I not have a leg to stand on because I'm just a paramedic, or maybe I'm just a nurse, or maybe I'm both of those? And do the physicians, like, does that get thrown back in deciding the movement of that patient? And did we really do the right thing? And then furthermore, can we retrospectively look at it and be like, you know what, maybe sometimes we got to take the L, and maybe that's the wrong word, right? But maybe we weren't the best mode of transport for that patient, but hey, it looks good. It looks good because it meets our culture and it says, this is our job.
I think where that comes into play, I mean, sometimes, yes, it is hard. And sometimes it doesn't matter if it's the easy or hard thing to do, that it's the right thing for that patient, right? And we still have to go and do it anyway. And we have to give it our best shot because this is the only option they have.
Sure.
But I think that comes when you have options. So as a program, if you have, if you're one of those programs that has the option of ground, rotor, and fixed, right? Like what is the best option at that time when you combine those clinical and you combine that aviation aspect of it? And do you have the freedom as a crew to be able to make that best case scenario decision, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's where that CRM comes into it and kind of ties all of those things together, because there has to be that happy balance. There has to be that melding between the aviation side and the medical side of the house. And you have to be able to look at this situation from that 1,000-foot view or 50,000-foot view, if you want to even go further, and be able to make that best case decision for that patient and yourselves at the end of the day, right?
Because everybody goes home.
Absolutely. And I think, having those guiding principles that I'm going to get put on a placard and hang on my wall from Russell Griffin.
Absolutely.
I think it helps to guide where some of that is coming from in the first place. But Russell, I'm curious, have you encountered maybe some real world examples that maybe didn't go the way that it was supposed to, where we kind of talked about the safety voice side of things, but maybe some of the operational decision making ended up becoming flawed secondary to some of these CRM or identity crisis issues, or maybe there were some other examples that you have from communication along the way, breakdowns that maybe just didn't go according to plan. What has been your experience with some of that stuff?
Yeah, so it's fascinating because from the research perspective, it was like 1983. I'd look up the actual dates. It was 1983 to 2022, 405 HIMSS-related accidents, total of 362 fatalities, and read every single accident report through those. And went through the transcripts where they were available from the crew, right, or debriefings and the investigations. And it's unbelievable how littered the sort of investigation records are about the breakdowns in these things. And what I've discovered, and this is probably the biggest paradox, and I think it's actually one of the presentations I had accepted for Echo this September, coming up this fall, is that it's easy to kind of get our feelies wrapped around the whole pressure to fly and the burden of response and that element. But when you look at the data, return to base and reposition is more deadly.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, okay, not studying that. I'm not saying we're doing things right in pressure to fly phase. Unequivocally, there are dramatically preventable future accidents in the so when I say pressure to fly, I'm talking about response and transporting. Right, those are the two phases. When I talk about low pressure or no pressure flights, that's going to be reposition or return to base. When you look at those and you break them down, and I did everything possible in those cases to be able to separate them, the actual lethality, like how fatal accidents are, it's worse in the return to base and reposition flights. And the total number of fatalities is higher in the transporting and responding phase, because naturally in transporting, you have typically other people or even family members, depending on what you're doing. But it's like that actually goes in the face of everything that we're talking about. And that's where it comes back to this kind of like identity thing. Well, what is it then that's killing us when we're returning to base? What is it that's getting us when we, I don't know the answer to that question, but what I can tell you is you're going to find all sorts of evidence throughout the accident investigations of where these breakdown communications have happened. And then you can actually have it from God bless those souls who have survived accidents, and we'll give a retelling. Obviously one of the most difficult, but one of the most candid and best conversations that I've heard you all have in particular was, of course, with Rhett Train, right? And the action we have with Fortunate Foxtrot. And, his retelling of that story and the crew, like literally speaking up. And, Rhett tells his side of that storyline about, he's like, what are we doing? I'm like, thanks, stop. And you now have this collision of like communication barriers, and it's the real time processing is happening so fast that to try to understand those dynamics at any given time, it's just like the pace of the event is unfolding faster than your ability to process the information.
Absolutely.
And it's like,
100%.
boom, you're in trouble. But if we're not having that conversation, like, when have we experienced that, gang? Like, let's talk about what it's going to be. Like, what's our safe word? How do we pause operations? Because you know what? It goes back to everybody goes home. Right? It's like, I don't know what I'll be honest. I think one of the best things to say is almost every incident that you can look at, you'll find a combination of communication breakdowns, and you'll find this combination of sort of even misinterpreting the actual unfolding scenario. I mean, I don't know about y'all, but when I'm aft facing in the back of an aircraft, that's like one of the scariest places in the world to be, especially whenever the crew up front, like if you have a medic or a nurse up front and you're working an emergency, it's like, I'm putting all my faith on what's happening up there. So the ability to assert an opinion is primarily obstructed.
Thank you to our sponsor, Precision Aviation Group. Mission-critical operators and fleet managers rely on Precision Aviation Group as a worldwide leading rotor and fixed-wing MRO provider. PAG provides tip-to-tail solutions in 4 MRO segments: avionics, components, engines, and manufacturing DER services. A single point of contact gives you access to over 150 million in inventory globally, 24/7. Just call 800-537-2778. Precision Aviation Group. Others sell parts. We sell support.
But is it now I want to go home versus everyone goes home? Because if it's that phase of those, you know, so it's a low risk, right? I don't know. It's all high risk because my life, your life, the pilot's life, like, is it I just want to go home and versus everybody goes home? Because I want to go home, but it's also everybody goes home. So if everybody goes home, then I go home. And then where's that pressure? Is there one person making that pressure? And Russell, you talked about this in your research. Is it now that if I speak up, like, I want to go home, but I also want everybody to go home, but I don't want to be looked at as the guy that just, well, what, you don't want to go home? You just don't want to fly tonight? You don't want to get back to base? Is that self-imposed? Is this top down, bottom up? How do we approach that and embrace that part of the CRM versus I want to go home versus everybody goes home?
It's all of the above. And I'm glad that you asked it that way. It's almost like I need to give you a $20 bill or something. What you just did was brought full circle the question about identity. There's a lot of reasons we can explain the fatality rate on return to base and reposition, right? You can attribute it to fatigue. You can refer to it as what we call sort of task residue. Task residue cognitively occurs when you switching tasks, right? So if you're in this high pressure scenario and you're doing whatever, big trauma, and then you load up in the aircraft, you know, you're going to have a passive loss of attention and you're going to be cognitively, you know, in a different space. Right. That might be part of it. Part of it could be just simple normalization of deviance, right? You start to have just this, like, what's a low risk flag? So why do I need to be eyes out? I can chart, right? You know, right. But I do think probably the biggest and that's why I have no motive in being right. There isn't like evidence that can purport this. I think it's identity. Nobody wants to be especially empathy for the pilots and for the crew. Nobody wants to be the one that like lands short and puts it in the field at 3:00 in the morning and goes, it just got too bad. And it's better that we land safe and we're here on the ground versus I can get there and I got the get there-itis, right? I think it is a combination of self-imposed and organizational expectations, and we're wearing flight suits and people think we're heroes. And it's one of the questions with this identity that I would love to be able to find a way for us to rebrand heroism and be able to acknowledge the fact that it might be more courageous to, like, you know, take one on the chin and go, we've got to like pick a field. I mean, it's not worth it. We're going to be potentially humiliated. We're going to be potentially embarrassed. We might have to like tow an aircraft. We might be out of service. We might be stuck in a field, but you know what? I'm alive. Mm-hmm. That sounds really pleasing and like easy to the ears when we say it that way. But you both know when we're in the aircraft at 3:00 in the morning, that rationality isn't present.
Yeah, for sure.
It's like we're heroes, we're brave, we're trained, we're courageous. We can get there. We're going to make it, or whatever the scenario is. But it's like that identity that we have and that the organization has shaped us into has led us down that path. And it's a collision of both self-imposed as well as external pressures.
Yeah. And I think that those external pressures are certainly, you know, much more prevalent. Like it's natural. We get down, tones go off, right? The three of us are going out on a flight. We have that endorphin dump. We're on a high, you know, but what happens when that energy drink wears off? And that's when we're dropping that patient off at the hospital, right? And now we go into this like depression, if you will, right? And mm-hmm. I think that those repo legs on the way home are oftentimes that the endorphins are done. We've worn off our energy drink now. We're in that lull phase. we let our guard down. Like, I hope it's not an identity thing at that point. I'm sure there's some get there-itis, right? But I hope that it's not an intentional thing. I don't that we're going down that route. But I also don't know how to necessarily combat that lull in our, dopamine circulating, that we're not at that point where we're on high alert until we are physically back on the ground at base.
But Mike, there's another flight pending, or there's another call. You just dropped that patient off at the hospital and you have that lull dump and like, oh, hey guys, we got another flight request.
Yeah. Maybe I just need to keep that in the back of my head the whole time. Like, I'm always on alert for another flight, right?
But Mike, you bring up like the most, that's this industry, right? Because the pre-hospital world, like the patient care world, it doesn't stop.
Yeah.
And I think as providers and as leaders and as people that do this job, like, and Russell, I said this earlier. What's the difference between the ground and air? Who am I to say that one is more valuable than the other? Well, maybe the risk is just high. If I get a flat tire on the ambulance, the risk is less likely that I'm going to end up with severe injury, disability, or God forbid death, versus we have an incident in the aircraft. And I think we should acknowledge that that's just the nature of this business. But Mike, I think we talked about this before in one of our other podcasts about, you've completed that flight. You just had that insane, intense trauma, right? And Mike, we nailed it in the back of that aircraft, right? We took care of that patient. Russell, we did amazing things. We got that patient to the trauma center. And now we're trying to clean up, right? And you just have that release.
Right.
And now another flight comes in. It's an interfacility. It's coming out of the hospital 2 blocks away. And it's going 15 minutes, a 15-minute flight. And now, where do we use that CRM and how do we make those decisions? Well, this is our identity. This is our culture. We treat and transport patients. It's the sickest of the sick to the routine, but patients still need care. They still have to get there. So how do those standards come into play, and how do we make sure that we're still doing that routine transfer is still equally as important, right? Like, who am I to say that patient's care is any more or less important than the severely injured trauma patient versus the person that needs to get to where the specialty is? And if you take away that, well, I don't know what that patient condition is when the decision is made to accept that flight, we've built that into, there's no identifying patient information. So okay, there's another flight. Can you accept it? Mike, can we do this flight? It seems to be routine. Can we accept that flight? So we do, and then we start getting the patient, okay, it just seems fair enough. It seems straightforward. It seems easy enough. It's a routine stroke, But then now, did we just bring in another level of either, are we safer? Are we unsafe by taking that? We just had this huge, insane flight. And are we now not acknowledging maybe some of the weather, all these other factors? So Russell, Mike, like, how do we make sure we're doing it safe? Because we still have an identity. We still have a job to do. How are we making sure that we're doing it safely?
Thank you to our sponsor, Metro Aviation. Metro Aviation, the world's largest family-owned aeromedical operator, offers comprehensive aircraft services with 160 plus aircraft in over 25 states. The Completion Center installs medical and law enforcement kits and avionics, serving diverse aviation needs including offshore, utility, VIP, and corporate sectors.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So I think it's a tricky answer, but I do think that there is an answer. And that is, we need to recognize the operational realities that we face. And what I mean by that is, for those of us that have done this a long time, it does just become task work, right? And obviously the routine flight thing's a killer in and of itself, because success breeds complacency, right? And that's that's a reality. I don't know. I think one of the questions might be, do we need to create intentionality, right? Do we need to have, so if we just dropped off a patient, let's say we don't have an impending flight, but we know we're getting ready to return to base. Maybe we need to discuss, is it operationally beneficial for us to meet at the nose of the aircraft before we load in and say, statistically, this is the deadliest phase of flight in air medical transport in the US. What we're going to do is talk about this proactively and discuss what are our risks going home. What can we do to limit those risks, and how are we going to communicate as a crew so if we face those things? It sounds like that's ridiculous, but I tell you what, the evidence demonstrates it's not. I mean, like it realistically says that no, I mean, we move into a phase. There's 1,000 things. Fatigue is undeniably huge. But when I talk about the operational reality, I think that's something we need to grapple with. Are we as clinicians and as providers in such a psychologically or emotionally or physically exhaustive state at the end of one of these transports that we are literally limited in our capacity to function moving forward? I don't know. I mean, that's like research. I think it would be fascinating. I mean, is that part of it, that we actually do need to go, well, what are the signs and symptoms of needing a timeout? Like we know we have timeouts, and some organizations are more promoting or encouraging, but I never would have thought about that as somebody that was, doing this for many, many years of stopping like on the helipad on the way home and going like, all right, like, what are we going to do on this flight? All of the attention is being delivered on the actual responding transport phase of flight. So I think it's a big question about, well, if we know that's what the data shows us, and if we know it's so dangerous, then what are we doing to actually inhibit? What are I don't want to say the barriers. We don't want to put operational barriers, but we want to enable operational behaviors that will break that tendency.
And I love what you said there. And I never really thought about it that way, in that we should, should we have that conversation? Should we meet at the nose of the aircraft? And should we have that? Like, I think we all go into this relaxation mode, and then you add fatigue on top of it when that endorphin rush is done and we're already fatigued. Does that put us into a place of deeper fatigue or less arousal in that moment to be able to be alert, to look around, to take in all of our surroundings and not answer that text message, or not be making plans for later that night, or to, all of a sudden your head is bobbing in the back of the aircraft, right? Like all of these factors, I think, play into it on that leg home. And I think that, we can certainly do more as an industry. I don't necessarily know of having to have that conversation of physically saying, statistically, this is the worst part, but there needs to be an acknowledgement of it somehow. There needs to be a way to put each of those crew members at a place of understanding that this is statistically the most dangerous part for us. Like maybe there's a code word, maybe there's something else that we, that we do that is acknowledging that. And I don't think it should just be for that leg, but I think there does need to be an acknowledgement that, guys, this is still a possibility. Like we can't let our guard down now. We still have to be on alert.
But Mike, I think it starts with us, right? Whether it's pilot, medic, nurse, I think somebody has to at least start the conversation. And I think the more that I don't know, is there an art to having difficult conversation to where our conversation's not really difficult, or are they just conversation? Either the more we have them, do we uncover some of these things? But Mike, you said it, like we got to start somewhere in this industry, because we have to do it and have that, because if we put our heads in the sand or we just say, oh, it's a 5-minute flight home. We got to start somewhere. We have to.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, you came full circle, didn't know it. So this is the core of identity crisis. This is what I meant by the provocation in that language. If we believe we are above all else a commercial aviation organization whose first accountability is to like operate aircraft or whatever it is that we have safely and effectively, and that transcends everything else, that's where the attention goes. I trained many flight nurses over the years. God bless them. They probably have all recovered by now. One of the things I always explained was your level of clinical expertise needs to be so proficient that you can focus almost all of your attention on the safe operation of the aircraft. And if that requires you abandoning patient care to ensure that you all arrive alive, that's what you need to do. If a pilot needs you to clear a side and you're the one on the BVM, you might need to drop the BVM and look for lines, right? And that was the kind of culture I grew up with, as I grew up with really strong, incredibly talented crews. But there wasn't any confusion. And what I mean by that is pick a commercial, operator like scheduled flights, Southwest, American Airlines, any of them. If they had a fatality accident rate that was as significant on repositioning ferry flights with no, paying customers on board that was anything like this, it'd be like, what the hell are we doing? It just doesn't make sense.
Right.
So it's that level of expectation or expertise. I mean, honestly, like crashing out in the back and like taking a nap and like doing these like, oh, where's my next Snickers bar? That's like the behaviors of being a medic. It's not the part of being like, I'm part of a flight crew. And that expectation is a higher calling when it comes to this level of risk. It's just different. Because to your point earlier, Blake, the consequences of action or inaction are so profoundly different than what happens on the ground. And I think it's that level of acknowledgement that it's like, we don't want to elevate our bravado. We want to elevate our accountability and our attention to detail in those things. And recognizing that we have to be all in on this. And if we're not, then we need to have both the courage and the enablement to say, we need a timeout. We need to rethink this. Like, what would help me? Whatever it is.
I think that also all these things that we're talking about, especially in the blending aviation and patient care or healthcare, I think this goes one step further into like initial training for people in healthcare, whether you're at the pre-hospital basic level or maybe into the initial introductory levels of nursing or healthcare. Like maybe we start this from the beginning. I'd never heard in EMT school that there may be a time you have to put the BVM down, to because they BSI scene safety, right? That's paramount. Yeah. That's the whole structure of introductory to pre-hospital. But I mean, maybe if that expectation or that ideation of there may be a moment you have to stop what you're doing in patient care to make sure everything is safe. Maybe in the fire world, as you go through introductory and through fire school, and as you come through, even in the physician world, or whatever that role may be, maybe if we introduce that earlier on in the onset, then does that grow as our identity as we come up through and further our education and further things through the world of delivering patient care?
I love that. And this is part of the reason why I love these conversations with you, Russell, because you challenge me to think in a different way. And I think that, never have I thought about, like, I've always thought you need to be a strong clinician to be a flight nurse or a flight paramedic. I've never looked at it from the perspective, and I've always been very what I would consider safe within the industry. I've tried to put that safety first mentality, but I've never looked at it from the perspective of you need to be so sound in your clinical or so skilled in your clinical scope that if you have to not do something, if you can't look away from your patient for a second, then you probably haven't set yourself up for success, because the paramount, the thing that matters most in that moment is the safety of the entire crew. And yes. I think it just, there are those patients where you are working your tail off the entire transport. And there are those patients you can't take your eyes off of them because it requires both of you to care for that patient. I'm not suggesting that people need to stop caring for patients, but you also need to know that if you have to look away for a couple seconds, that you're setting yourself up in a good spot, or that you're having that communication between you and your partner in the back so that somebody's focusing on one thing while, and I can think of patient situations where I maybe have not been able to do that because of whatever was happening at that moment in time with that patient. And we have all had those where, Murphy is alive and well, and things are just not going right. And it's not just one thing, right? But I've never really thought about it in that perspective. It's kind of always been okay, well, on the way to the flight, it's all of our responsibility. When I have the patient in the back, my primary responsibility is the patient. But still, in reality, my primary responsibility is the safety still at this point, right? But it's easy to get like caught in that little world, right? And that what's in front of us right now and the thing that we need to do and why we were in this aircraft in the first place is to take care of that patient, right? But we still, at the end of the day, can't keep doing that until we keep that safety focus. And so I appreciate having these conversations because I feel as though there is the identity, my identity as a flight clinician, I think very much complements the identity of the aviation side of the house. Yes. But there are those times where they do butt heads. And I think that that's the challenge sometimes, is being able to work through those situations because they are very similar, but there is certainly those times where you have to prioritize one over the other. And I guess, at the end of the day, like with the research that you've done, do you feel like as a global industry looking at this, do you feel as though we have a pretty happy balance across the industry, or are you seeing it lean in one direction or the other more, and why?
Thanks to our sponsor, Airbus. Airbus provides the most efficient helicopter solutions to its customers who serve, protect, save lives, and safely carry passengers in demanding environments. Its civil and military helicopters are flying all over the world, making missions possible. Visit airbus.com for more information.
And friends or enemies here? Maybe a little bit of both.
Maybe you were hoping we wouldn't get to that question.
No, you're good. So I'm gonna give a hopefully a helpful answer. And I'm gonna answer it because you asked at the industry level. My tie story, I'm gonna get very specific. Mm-hmm. So if we go back to the late 1800s, early 19th century, the United States Fire Service was evolving in the U.S., and it's really well portrayed in Leonardo DiCaprio, Gangs of New York. In that movie, there's depictions of fire companies, that's right, where some of the early terminology came from, who are competing against each other to suppress fires because there were actual reimbursements affiliated with that in the early fire service. In the U.S., that became a very regulated industry, and then, that was basically eliminated, and hence the traditions. And of course, the fire service is 220 years of tradition unimpeded by progress. We all know that's true. But refugees industry is self-regulated. And like that doesn't exist, right? So we have mutual aid agreements, but you're quite literally not see compete. It's just as illogical when it comes to that type of emergency suppression. I think in the U.S. in particular, the air medical transport industry, we're still stuck in that paradox. And I don't mean that to say that competition is a problem. I think it's commercial aviation. It's just a reality.
Right.
How do we get the industry to go forward with that? I would like to write, maybe I will, I don't know, find somebody else to do this with me. In 1999, the Institute of Medicine published a report called EMS at the Crossroads. And it was basically a reflection on the history of EMS and its sort of evolution. I feel like we're at this sort of air medical transport at the crossroads, and starting to address some of these questions and ask really tough things like, what are we willing to give up to get what we want? I don't know, but I think that's something that we need to spend some time in reflection on. I think it is. To your point, there are very, very, very easy ways to have very difficult conversations. There's structured ways to do that. And maybe that's a conversation for another day that we could have. But there are ways we can bring up difficult topics in a way that always doesn't incite violence and the people we want to talk to. But that is back to that's part of the identity, right? If we frame ourselves as an organization who will have tough conversations, candid can mean conflict, but we value that over, right, making poor decisions and I'm getting people hurt. I don't know the answer. I can definitely see from speaking with clinicians that work for all types and varieties of programs that it is very much all over the place. There's a lot of good programs, trying to do a lot of good things. And we conduct, thousands of flights every year very safely. That should all be applauded. But I can't look at the trend. And, even mutual friends of ours like Michael Benton and other champions in this industry, we can't look at the trend and go, this is acceptable. And one of the earliest lessons I learned in medicine, and I think we have to have like a healthy state of paranoia in this business. And one of the earliest lessons I learned was, you know what the difference is between today and the worst call of your career? It's the next call. You don't have the liberty in this industry to like gain speed and be like, I'm going to be okay today. And I'm going to like earn tenure and knowledge and stuff.
Yeah.
And so what that meant to me is I learned as a clinician very young, especially in flight medicine, we have to control the controllables. You need to know how to operate that ventilator like your life depends on it, right? Mm-hmm. Because one day it might. I mean, because that's what I mean. If you're head down in a ventilator because you can't remember how to go to SIMB, whatever, with the PP5, and if you're struggling with that, and you got a pilot in Class B who's isolated you, and they're trying to navigate, a crossing aircraft, if they don't want to take you off isolation because you're back there freaking out because you don't remember how to do the functional basic stuff for the vent, that's where it's like, that's what I mean. So I don't an abstract answer, but I definitely think the industry, and God bless the, Operators Association, and there's really good groups of people trying to continue to come together. And I'm just one person that hopefully isn't pissing too many people off, but are willing to have a conversation with. But I do think we need to ask this principle, like, what are we willing to give up to get what we want? Because there's not any other way to approach that conversation that I can think of. And I'm,
damn, man, that hits. And Russell, this is why I love having these conversations with you, because you bring up the things that I think either, the people that you're friends with, they're like, I'm friends with that guy because he'll always say the things that I'm either afraid to say out loud, right? You're like, that's why we keep Mike around. He'll say it, that's why we love Russell. But I love so much the fact that you challenge it, just me personally, to continually strive to be better, because we are perfectionists. And I think if we know that we will never achieve perfection, but along that way, we will achieve excellence and greatness along the way. That's why I love having these conversations, Russell, because I feel like there's probably people out there that want to, but you're the guy that puts in the work and time to have these conversations, because you truly have this drive for this industry to be better, to be safer. And that really comes again to really full circle, I think, in the patient care delivery. And that is why I love having these conversations. You challenge me on a personal level to just, one, be a better person, but I think two, to also be a better clinician and be a better provider out there, because that's truly why we do this. And I want to throw out this last question. I know the things that I take away from these conversations, and I don't think it's one thing. I have a list here of things, but if there's one major takeaway that you could put out there for our listeners to take back to their base, to take back to their home, to take back to themselves, what's one thing, given today's conversation, what's one thing you think you would put out there for them to take back and ponder or discuss to work on and change? What would it be?
I love the question. I think, given the essence of this conversation relative to this topic, it is to have the vulnerability and also the courage to spend some time in reflection and writing down, or however you want to say it, like what your identity is, both as a person, like from a human perspective, and then also from like a professional lens. And then if that transcends over to those who, are leaders in my organization, can you begin to articulate those as an organization? Not what you want your culture to be, all that kind of stuff, but really writing down like this is as I want people to have. I think there's a joy that can come with the connection of having a sense of oneself. And I appreciate your kind comments. It means the world to me. And it comes through like 51 years of making really bad decisions and doing a lot of stupid stuff. And but I hope the enduring trait is the humility to recognize that I've done a lot of dumb things. I've treated people poorly in life, and I've made decisions that I regret and I want to make right. And hopefully this is part of that, making it right over time. But I think that that's the one thing, is to really make sure that you're connected with what you do, and don't let what you do drive who you are. Because one day you're going to take this uniform off, right? One day you're just going to be a guy or a gal, or you're going to be whatever. And you want that now to help drive what you do, but you also want that in the future, because this is a phase and a vital part of what you do and who you are, but it's not who you are.
I love that.
Oh man. I think, Mike, what do you think? Russell, what do you think? I think another podcast. How do we prepare for when we hang up the flight suit?
Yeah. Well, I feel like today has been informative, provocative, and also a therapy session for me.
All in one.
All in one.
Man. Oh, gosh.
All in one. Oh man, that self-reflection certainly hits home a little bit. And I think we all struggle to some extent with not with separating who we are and what we do. Yep. And I think that's a natural thing in this industry. And I think that I certainly have taken a lot of things away. I think, what I thought I knew my identity was before, I'm not so sure walking out of this conversation now.
Oh, I don't even know now. I
need to go back
to
the drawing board.
Find it. I got to go find it.
Yeah. But I've truly appreciated having this discussion, Russell. Always a pleasure having you on. And thank you for making us think about the difficult questions and being provocative in those terms to make us look at it a different way. Like I so appreciate the ability to have those open and honest conversations, and I can't wait to have more of them. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you guys. I'll leave you with this. I hope you're as proud of yourselves as I am of you. You're doing the Lord's work and making the world a better place. So thank you for having me, and I can't wait to chat again in the future. So fly safe.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. For all you guys out there, thank you again for your continued support of the Valor Flight Crew podcast and the Vertical Helicast platform. If you're all caught up on your Valor Flight Crew, make sure you head on over to verticalhelicast.com, where you can check out the Hangar Z podcast, Helicopter podcast, Vertical MRO podcast. Be safe, everyone. We'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Valor Flight Crew podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories that promote the personnel and equipment behind the missions in public safety aviation. Lastly, stand by for a message from our sponsors.
Thank you to our sponsor, Metro Aviation. Metro Aviation, the world's largest family-owned aeromedical operator, offers comprehensive aircraft services with 160-plus aircraft in over 25 states. The Completion Center installs medical and law enforcement kits and avionics, serving diverse aviation needs including offshore, utility, VIP, and corporate sectors.
Thanks to our sponsor, Airbus. Airbus provides the most efficient helicopter solutions to its customers who serve, protect, save lives, and safely carry passengers in demanding environments. Its civil and military helicopters are flying all over the world, making missions possible. Visit airbus.com for more information. Thank you to our sponsor, Precision Aviation Group. Mission-critical operators and fleet managers rely on Precision Aviation Group as a worldwide leading rotor and fixed-wing MRO provider. PAG provides tip-to-tail solutions in 4 MRO segments: avionics, components, engines, and manufacturing DER services. A single point of contact gives you access to over 150 million in inventory globally, 24/7. Just call 800-537-2778. Precision Aviation Group. Others sell parts. We sell support.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Valor Flight Crew podcast. A huge thank you to Russell Griffin for sharing his insight, experience, and honest perspective on the human side of safety culture and identity. Conversations like this remind us that safety is never just about policies, checklists, or procedures. It's about people. It's about the culture we create, the way we communicate under pressure, and the willingness to stay humble, speak up, and keep learning from one another every day. Whether you work in the cockpit, the cabin, or behind the scenes supporting the mission, we hope this discussion encourages you to reflect on the role identity, leadership, and teamwork play in the environments we operate and in the patients we serve. As always, thank you for being a part of this community and for everything you do to keep your crews, your patients, and yourselves safe. Until next time, take these conversations back to your bases and keep challenging each other to define your identity, refine your culture, and elevate your safety margins. We'll see you next time on the Valor Flight Crew Podcast.